afternoon and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Spares C7 deck, and what I'm going to be doing is familiarising myself with stripping down the deck and also collecting all of the belts and the individual rollers from the machine so that I can get, once I've tested the other deck, and if it works, I can actually get some replacement belts and some replacement rollers. And certainly next week's video we'll be covering actually testing the other deck just to make sure that it works once I've replaced the small spring on the brake band release bit of plastic that I've got there. As thinking about it, I think that bit of plastic, because it wasn't releasing properly, was causing problems with the arm that brings the tape across the erase head. Now the first thing I had to do with this particular deck was to actually get that cassette out. As you can see, the cassette has been left in the machine, and the machine has, well, the cassette's basically been left laced in the machine, which does seem to suggest that the machine probably failed whilst it was in operation. So unfortunately, I couldn't really sort of be too careful getting this out. If I wanted to strip it down further, I probably could. And you could probably sort of just wind the deck back manually, actually, to get that out. But to be honest, I wasn't too fussed about this cassette, so I just carefully teased it out and left it a bit crinkled, but you could probably reuse this cassette after a cleaning. Now, we're focusing in on that plastic arm, which I'm just pointing at there, and the spring on this particular arm was actually in much better condition. Now the arm itself is very difficult to remove. It seems to be sort of held into the deck with some kind of sort of plastic tab. It's not sort of like those typical little circlip things that's holding it in. There are certain elements of the deck which do have the circlips holding on to sort of various parts of it, but this little arm itself is actually held in with one of these plastic pins. So what I had to do was I had to carefully take the spring off, and it was a little bit sort of difficult to do with the screwdriver that I had. So when I come to put this back onto the other deck, I will probably use some needle nose pliers to get that on. So as you can see, the spring I've got here is in much better shape than the one on the other machine, so that's going to be going on to the other machine. Now the next thing I wanted to do was to actually get all of the belts off this particular deck, and to do that I had to go to the underside. So once you've got that main board flipped up, you do have access to all of the belts on the underside. The one from the video head to I believe it's the sort of the take-up spool reel, or sort of rubber belt, rubber wheel rather, does come off quite easily. This next one that goes to the loading mechanism is not as easy. So there's basically a motor on the top side, the top of the picture, and that motor drives the loading mechanism. There's a belt which you can see I'm just putting out the way there, which actually drives the whole mechanism. I believe it also drives the capstan motor. The capstan as well, as the capstan's driven off the same motor by the looks of it. And there's a cog at the top which engages. Now I'm focusing here on the little field effect sensor that is on the capstan mounting bracket. There's a little plastic locating hole that the capstan flywheel sits in, and that's a really sort of good spot to actually apply a little bit of grease, just to make sure that the capstan sort of spins freely. That's the belt off the capstan, and I'm just reassembling the little arm here. It's got a little circlip which I'm just putting back on, and then there is the idler cog that you have to remount as well. Now this idler cog actually has a small little screw which attaches it to the arm, and the arm itself is actuated by the deck as the loading ring is going round. I think that arm is the deck is fully sort of laced, that arm is pushed out the way so that the capstan can start spinning when you hit play. It's an interesting way to do it, and it does save on having multiple motors for capstans, etc. The downside is you do have an awful lot of belts. So as you can see here, I've got the 2 screws. So the smaller one is for the mounting that sort of idler cog onto the arm, and that longer one matches up with another longer one which fits the capstan bracket to the machine. Now the reason why I'm putting this back together is so that I don't have bits on the underside of a deck flying loose, and it also means that if I'm going to be using this for spares, which I am, I keep all of the sort of parts in good shape, and I know exactly where they are and where they're mounted on the machine, ready for when I transfer them over if I needed to. So this belt here is a bit of a pain to actually get off, and the only way I can see of actually doing it is you have to flip the machine over, which I'm just doing here. You can see the motor at the bottom of the picture there. That's the motor that drives the capstan and also the deck loading mechanism. The video head itself doubles as a motor which drives the take-up spool, and also I believe drives the fast forward and rewind facilities. Now I'm taking this cover off of the loading cog, and I'm trying to work out how I can get that long belt, the long drive belt for the deck, actually out of there. Now there are 2 screws which hold in the pulley that the belt latches onto. One of them you can get to quite easily. The other one you actually have to get to. There's a little plastic wiring harness tray which you can see here, and there's a little hole there that if you have the right size screwdriver you can actually go right the way down into there to get that belt out. Get that sort of pulley out. Now it seems that if you are going to be replacing that pulley, I would sort of probably think the best way to do it is if the deck is unlaced, because what I discovered was you have to slightly loosen the loading ring, and you have to take the cog that is on the loading ring, you actually have to take that off. And once I took that off, I was actually able to get that belt out, because you can see there the belt is actually in the way of the the pulley is actually in the way of the belt, so you can't actually get it out. So what I did was I actually took the belt out, took that pulley off, and then I took the belt out after I'd released the loading ring. I did it in a slightly rough way, let's say. I wasn't particularly sort of careful with it because I just wanted to get the belt out by this stage. And what I actually ended up doing was prising back or bending back the end tape detection post, and just popping the circlip off of that loading cog, and then releasing the loading ring by undoing a little locating pulley that sort of keeps the loading ring in place. Now I probably could actually sort of do this in a more graceful way, and to be honest, because the belt on the other machine looks okay, I'm sort of loath to actually replace this belt if I don't have to. But if I have to, then I will sort of try to look at another slightly better way to do this. I mean, there's got to be a better way to actually replace this belt, rather than sort of having to hack the machine apart. As you can see there, that's the pulley I removed, and that does actually give you the leverage to sort of prise back that loading ring. I'm actually hoping in the unlaced condition that the loading ring is in such a way that it can actually be moved a little bit easier, and you can actually sort of take that cog off without having to disturb the ring, because obviously the ring will be right at the beginning of its travels. It does mean that when I sort of come to do this, I will have to actually reassemble it quite carefully and make sure that it does still lace correctly, so I envisage some fun there. Now, I did think that there were Hall effect sensors under those spools. There aren't actually any sensors at all, it's just literally just a spool. So what I did whilst I was faffing about with that load ring was I actually just took the opportunity to get all of the idler tyres off of these various idlers, ready to sort of obviously size those up, ready for replacements for the other C7. What I did with this one was actually took the whole tyre off by just flipping that little circlip out the way and pulling the entire idler off itself. As you can see there, I got the long got the long loading belt out at last, but unfortunately to the detriment of the physical deck on this machine. One of the screws holding in the idler that belt, the long belt, was wrapped around, does actually seem to have sort of corroded into the body of the machine, or the chassis of that deck itself, which is just sort of like really another sign that this machine has been sort of out in the open and exposed to the elements. Well, not exposed to the elements, in a shed that's probably very damp, so it really is just for spares only. Now what I'm showing here is all of the belts from the machine, including the various idlers, and also, once I find it, the actual spring that I'm going to be replacing. So all of these belts make up the main sort of drive mechanism within this machine. You can see over the years how they've actually simplified this, and certainly on decks like the C9 and the F1 they have used direct drive motors, which make a lot more sense, to be honest with you. More expensive, but they do make more sense. What I'm showing here is the clock from this machine. And the reason I'm showing this is due to the poor display on my other one. So these ribbon cables are connected here, and you can see that there's a number of dry joints on there. And also on this particular machine there's a number of corroded joints because it's been, I don't know, stored in a pond or something by the looks of it. But that's certainly something that I will be taking a look at once I've got the other machine working. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. If you would like this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Also consider subscribing for upcoming fascinating hobbies. Thanks for watching.